NAMM Show. That's different than your average NAMM experience, right? Average NAMM experience is everyone's trying to sell you something, right? But in this space, we wanted to create a situation where you guys can come and explore innovation, pursue new ideas, and also do your B2B networking if that's what you want to do. So I mean, we got a lot of companies represented just in the audience here. So thank you for being here at the Innovation Lounge. Today, we're going to be hosting a panel. This is called the Impact of Immersive Audio on Our Digital Future. And it's an absolutely stacked panel. And I'm going to introduce everybody one by one. And this is a real special one for me. Just kind of give everybody an idea of where I'm coming from. I'm originally a musician. I was a saxophonist for many years. I was a professional. And then about 7 years ago, I got into immersive audio and it changed my life. I started to experience, what it was like to be completely surrounded by audio. My first experience, I believe, was, one of my first headphone experiences was on the OSIC X. Does everybody remember the OSIC X headphone? No, because, it disappeared, right? But it was really cool because they had customized HRTFs. I was in a virtual reality experience with a headset. I was reaching out in front of me and I grabbed a piece of sound and I moved it around my head. And from that moment, I knew this is what I'm going to focus my life on, right? And I'm sure a lot of you guys have had a similar experience if you're here. But since then, I learned a lot about the immersive industry before joining GPU Audio 3 years ago. And one of the things that I learned about it is that it's full of incredibly smart people, much smarter than me, that are building products every day that are going to change the way we do things. So we wanted to host this panel today to try to give space for these wonderful people to speak and to share their ideas about what they think needs to happen in this industry so that we can all move forward and really see things explode, and see, next generation experiences become the norm. And that's really what I'm hoping we'll get out of it. So about the moderation style, I'm going to, as much as possible, allow everybody to speak with each other in conversation and then have you guys interact with questions and things like that in the middle of it. So it might be a little messy. It's definitely not like a standard interview or anything like that, but this is the way I like to do things. And I've got some hot takes that I might throw out and see if we can get some opinions going. And but in general, I just like to start by introducing everybody. So I'm going to hop off the stage real quick. I'm going to make sure I'm not feeding back too much here. All right, on the left we have Jackie Bosnjak. Sorry, Jackie, I always mess it up. From Mach 1, please give Jackie a hand. We've got Bill Eggleston with Genelec. Nuno Fonseca of Sound Particles. Jean-Marc Jot of everything. I call him King. He's king for me. And Christian Sander, Dear Reality. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves properly and tell you about what they do one by one, and then we'll get started with the first question. So why don't we start with Jackie? And for the microphones, if you guys could just kind of yank them in, pull them in a little closer to your faces, that'd be great, just to avoid our feedback. And sure, let's go with intros. Jackie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jacqueline Bosnjak. I'm the CEO and co-founder of One. We're a sound technology company focused on spatial audio. We had a studio called Q Departments that's been in existence since 2003. And early on in 2015, we started getting involved in VR and AR. We had a lot of directors like 20th Century Fox with Ridley Scott coming to our studios and asking us to do spatial audio. At the time, we were very blocked. The pipeline was very broken. And we were really worried about the future of where sound was going as a company that was artists and developers. So we sort of reluctant software engineers. We opened up our company in 2015 and have been focused on unifying spatial audio and multi-channel audio for creators and developers to get really excited about creating a new medium.
Thank you, Jackie. My name is Will Eggleston, and I'm with Genelec. Been with them for about 26 years now. And my business card says marketing director, really more like the chief cook and bottle washer for the Genelec team here in the West. I've had many years in the digital audio business. Previous to Genelec, I was at Lexicon as a product development manager. I'm certainly humbled being up here amongst some people that I really do admire quite a bit. This guy over here. But anyway, but yeah, it's Genelec's been a company that's been around for about 45 years, and we make a lot of different products for a lot of different applications. So I think it's fitting that at least we're represented up here. I guess.
So hi everyone, my name is Nuno from Sound Particles. I'm the founder and CEO. Sound Particles initially created with this crazy idea of using thousands of sounds around to create these amazing soundscapes. That's the original Sound Particles software that was created mainly for big post-production facilities for movies, television, video games, things like Game of Thrones, Star Wars, those things. Later on, we started creating also, besides our Sound Particles application, also created some plugins, some, of course, all of them with special features. They still work with stereo, but they started with spatial. Then we created something called Space Controller that allows you to use your phone to pen like a laser pointer. You simply point the phone to pen things in 3D. And more recently, like 2 days ago, we released a 3D synthesizer that you play in now to get spatial audio. So we have a big passion about spatial audio and all the crazy things that we can do with it.
Thank you, Nuno.
My name is Bosnjak. I've been working on spatial audio for a long time now, maybe 3 decades. Starting with a PhD, research, algorithms, focusing on artificial reverberation at first. Then I went, after that work, I went to IRCAM, which is the Music Research Center in Paris, and worked on a tool to actually compose spatial audio, which is a lot of fun. And basically, I haven't left the field since then because I loved it too much. So after that, I went to do very similar work, or instead of music-oriented, more gaming-oriented, but still developing tools and APIs and engines for game audio, attempting to provide a bit more consistency and standardization in that field. I stayed a long time at Creative, so then we branched into computer audio. When I started there, a computer was not a media machine to watch movies and play your music, but now we used our mobile phones for that. But at the time, there was a time when we used our computers. So Creative was big into making sound cards that would enable the computer to do this. Then I went to DTS to sort of pursue that direction of developing technology that's licensed to manufacturers. But there was immersive audio again there, so we developed the DTSX standard, which is an alternative to Dolby Atmos and Sony 360, used in successful in some fields. And then I went to Isotope, so back to music creation, and now I actually run my own business, which is consultancy, advising, developing some IP, essentially strategic advising.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. All right, Christian.
Yeah, my name is Christian Sander. I'm CEO, co-founder of D-Reality. We founded D-Reality in 2014, and since 2019, we're happy to be part of the Sennheiser Group. My background is also sound engineering. In the beginning of D-Reality, we started with a lot of spatial audio productions, started creating tools, and now we have like a portfolio for spatializer, pretty much focused on virtual acoustic simulation, virtual monitoring to monitor multi-channel setups, ambisonics, and also controllers for spatial positioning and so on.
Awesome, thank you so much. So let's kind of start on that topic, the creation side, with creators. Let's call it 7 or 8 years ago. I started trying to learn how to create spatial audio because I heard a demo. The demo blew me away. I quickly realized that there was almost no tools available, for working in this region. I had to learn how to render audio in command line, using code essentially. And I was not a developer. I came from this as a saxophone player. So, the only digits I focused on were these digits, at the time. But since then, your guys' companies. Oh, is that me? Is that me?
In front of the speaker.
The audio gods.
I'm trying to get out of the way.
So I'll hide. Nobody needs to see me anyway. It's cool. As long as you can hear me, look at the important people. So when I started getting into this, I realized that there's a severe lack of tools, right? That is not necessarily the case today, although we can still have a long ways to go, in terms of developing tools. Maybe starting with Christian, since he's the last to ask, what was the impetus for you to start wanting to design more spatial audio tools? Was this a market decision, or was this just purely a creative decision? What is it that sort of spurred you into this? What was the trigger?
For our first product, our spatializer, it was exactly what I mentioned. We were creating a virtual or a spatial audio radio play or WDR radio station, and we needed a spatializer tool, a binaural rendering tool. We needed different acoustic scenarios, so it was exactly, we had this project to do, and we already had the binaural rendering technology, and we said, okay, what features do we need? So it was really the creativity drove exactly the feature set and we needed for this product. And then we just worked on it, used it for the first productions, improved it over time. And I think that's always the way to go. So yesterday we also had a discussion panel on spatial audio, and I think we all agreed that usually the creativity should drive the products and the technology and not the other side. But of course there can be impulses from the technical side, where it's like a new invention or a new feature that you can propose to the creative side and say, hey, what can you do with that? And then something new creates. But it wasn't in the beginning a market decision. I mean, in 2017, when we released our first spatializer, binaural production wasn't a thing, and it was multi-channel just started or was already a thing in movies. But it was really okay, we need this tool, and it's quite interesting. But we were pretty much seen as an exotic company at that time, and I'm very happy that has changed, and spatial audio is so present here at this show and everywhere. So that's pretty cool.
Jackie, what about you?
I think we're reluctant software developers. We got involved really early on and got blocked, kind of like a lot of people did. And then realizing that we were at this precipice that was so exciting, because spatial audio suspended disbelief in virtual reality, and it needed to be extremely high quality and really well done. And that triggered something really exciting in us, as a studio, because we're oh my God, finally there's going to be this renaissance where sound quality isn't about audio files, we got to do it in high quality and it's never going to happen. This was critical for immersion. And I can give you a good example of when I first got into virtual reality. There's a piece called Wolves in the Walls, and you put on the Oculus headset, and a little girl comes up to you, but your headset's all smudged and you can't really see. And she walks up to you and she rubs it clean. And it's a squeaky, squeaky spatial audio. And at that point, she acknowledges that you're in her world. You feel present with her. And when that happened, as a studio, we realized that we had left the experience economy and entered the memory-making business. Because when you leave these kind of immersive experiences that 50% or more is sound, you really feel like you were somewhere that you weren't, and you have a memory of being there. And as storytellers that had a studio and worked with major directors doing amazing projects, we couldn't look away. Our life was changed forever. And I always tell the story of Plato's cave, which is a parable from way, way back in Plato's time. But it was that same experience where, I don't know if any of you guys know that parable. Does anybody? Well, imagine you were chained with, your hands behind the back in a cave, and the only thing you saw were people walking through the front of the cave, but as shadows in front of you. So you never actually saw who they were. It's just shadows. And what if you could break those shackles and sort of walk out of the cave to the light into the three-dimensional world? What would that feel like? And I always use that parable because that's what it felt like when we experienced spatial audio for the first time, or the power of this media. And from there on, we just had to make tools. We went to GDC early on, I think it was around 2015 as well, maybe a little bit earlier, 2013. And a lot of the technology companies were sort of talking like musical morticians. baking rules into the system.
Musical morticians.
Yeah. And we were kind of horrified because we were like, why would you throw decades of the craft out the window when finally we have this amazing medium where we can all craft amazing new experiences? Let's create tools that unlock that for everybody to extend audio best practices, bring all that creativity and bring all the masters of the craft into this new medium. And let's build new things. So that's why we built our tools.
That's lovely. You know, both you and Christian sort of triggered a thought, if you don't mind me asking a question. You know, the roots of where spatial audio came from with where you guys started. And when I say spatial, I feel a little foolish anyway. I feel a little guilty because really the roots of this is immersive is a much better word, right? For where the roots of these experiences came from. You know, you started out wanting to fully bring people into a new world. And now we're talking about spatial audio as though one company has put a trademark on the name or something like that. When in reality, the immersion, the experience of being, you know, just embedded within a different environment, transporting the listener and creating an experience is much more important than just the idea that it's spatial, right? Spatial to me is a very clinical term. So, you know, it just makes me wonder, you know, it's not exactly a hot take, but, you know, how do you feel about the direction things are going? You know, and I want this to be kind of an open discussion. And feel free to disagree with each other. Say whatever is on your mind. This is a safe space, right? So, but, you know, I'm just thinking, what do you think of the direction that we're going? Because it kind of feels like we're consolidating spatial audio into a genre, right? When really it's a medium of experience, which is, you know, to some people that might sound like the same phraseology, but really it's philosophically is very different, right? So do you feel like we're sort of have drifted away a little bit from the roots, you know, with the commercialization of spatial audio, or do you actually see it as a benefit? You know, in terms of where we're going with this, and if not, how can we course correct? Or if you think we're on the right course, how can we lean in further? Any thoughts about that? I'm going to let you guys discuss, and we might have the audience pop in with a couple comments as well.
I would say that, of course, there are some things that I eventually would refer to be slightly different, but I like the fact that yes, we continue to have more and more interest in spatial or immersive audio. Okay, that's one thing that I like. More people are wanting to enter this world. More people are creating things for this kind of audio. More people are interested in distributing them. More people are creating tools for all of this, and I like that. So it's not something that we see. Now it's dialed down, and okay, it's the beginning of going down. Of course. There is one thing that I also like is the fact that sometimes this becomes almost like transparent for the users. Okay, so a lot of people, for instance, are using Apple Music, but they are listening to spatial audio and they don't even know that it's spatial audio because it's on by default. So, there are some interesting things there. Of course, there are the big companies trying to export this commercially, okay, that they may have put too much pressure on their interests, but okay, it's part of the game. I think we cannot be naive and think, no, this is everyone, a Zen club, everyone doing everything. No, there is, for instance, I have a company, I have salaries to pay. I need to make sure that I also get money to pay the salaries, the same way that other companies want to do the same thing. But once again, since I have this passion for spatial audio, so far I like the fact that things are moving forward. I think, yes, it would be great if it moved even faster. Yes, it would be great if there are slightly less monopolies or something like that. But I so far, I like the fact that we are moving forward instead of simply a niche that comes in and comes out. So far, yes.
I was going to add that there's that saying, a rising tide raises all ships. So I feel like that's happening, which is great. I feel like Apple and Dolby have definitely made spatial audio, something that's gonna walk. It's gonna happen. It's like before we used to have a lot of meetings or calls where people were like, "But is it a thing?" And I'd always be like, "Well, is hearing naturally a thing? It's a thing." It's like Anyway, that was my pet peeve. Always having to talk to people about, is it a thing? And after Apple and Dolby came into the arena, nobody asked if it's a thing. It's a thing, which was great. But actually, we're going to play after this a piece that we did with Eli Kessler, who's on Lucky Me Warp Records. and it's a percussionist piece that was done as a concept album in Mach 1 Spatial. It has head tracking and it has no filtering or processing. He used our system to do that. That was as he intended. And we built an app with our SDK and released it on Apple, and it got blocked. So that's the part where I'm sort of a little bit like pushing the industry to let artists iterate, let artists figure out what it is, what it's going to be. Let's create test kitchens where we can explore this new medium and build things together that have never been built before. What we were told by Apple was that their lawyers said that if it's a spatial album, it has to get released with their room modeling filter. And that was just like ridiculous. So we're still fighting that battle. That app is still in testing. It's being blocked. Luckily, Warp Records actually said, let's just release it as a test flight. And I was like, oh, I never thought about that. That's kind of an interesting, that's an interesting way around it. And I do think that as the artist intended always eventually rises. But I think that it is up to people that are here in the room and on this panel to push technology companies to allow artists to do all the things that they want to do. It's not just one way. I think we need to not have boundaries for creativity. And that's kind of why we're excited to be working with GPU Audio, is we don't even know what we're going to make in the future, but we're tooling for it with GPU Audio and Mach 1. So, I think it's an exciting time, but we need to put pressure on technology companies to open the gates a little bit and allow creativity to flow.
I agree, and that's nice.
I was going to ask people on either side of me, as a speaker manufacturer, some people might think that, our position in the industry is rather simplified, and that might be true. We have our competitors and we have our own, processes that we have to go through in order to, what do I know? But we have our own processes that we have to do year after year. We have products that we make, but we're a loudspeaker company. Yes, we do have some DSP that works in order to try to make the listening experience with monitoring as accurate as possible. But, we have to keep our eyes on the competitors and what they're doing. But with the people who are on the other side of me here, I'm wondering, how do you talk about speed, how fast things are being developed? How do you keep up with all of this stuff? Because I'm just, it seems like every week I'm reading about something that I completely do not understand. I just wonder, where do you guys feel?
So I'd like to make a comment on what I think is a huge change that has happened, and I'm grateful to Dolby and Apple and Sony 360 and others for doing this. Is that today, when you create a piece of music, you no longer have to assume before you do it how many channels you're creating. There used to be a time when you had to say it's a piece for stereo or for 5.1. And now, thanks to those standards, there are limitations which I'll talk about afterwards. But one thing you can do right now is you can imagine that you're creating something where a person is going to be in the middle of an immersive environment of sound, instruments, whatever, and you don't have to pre-assume what is the format in which they're going to consume it. So that means that for loudspeaker manufacturer, this is great because they can buy a few or more loudspeakers. They can all work together depending on what is your budget to create a richer loudspeaker playback experience. And if you're alone, if you're creating, you don't want to buy speakers, you can play on headphones. And this technology is evolving in such a way that even when you monitor on headphones, you can hope to get a close rendition of what would be experienced with the loudspeaker system. This is huge. If, like 2 or 3 years ago, you could not be very realistically think that you could do that unless you were a researcher in a lab. And now the tools are becoming democratizing to enable this. I find that super exciting. Like SkyDust can work in any format, right? Yeah. Thanks to that. And I find that a big step.
I really agree what you said. I think spatial audio has become pretty much accessible on the playback side. Like Apple Music, whatever, really pushing it, making it default available for everyone, but also on the production side, like what you mentioned with virtual monitoring, you don't need a big loudspeaker setup. Of course, it helps a lot, and you should check your mix in the end on it, but it really helps you to already start the production from wherever you are. I think that helps pretty much for these workflows. What I also see quite positive with these opportunities and this big mass drop by Apple to say, okay, now everything should, or has to be spatial in the future. It's really become even more important topic in the music industry, and I think a lot of producers are going to do more spatial productions. A lot of aesthetics are currently being tried out. I mean, it's sometimes still feels a bit like Wild West, but it's getting into like an aesthetics currently where there are pretty good productions that I also heard here at the demo rooms, and where you feel, okay, they just don't use spatial audio to show, hey, it's something on the left or above because we can't show it. It's more like, okay, it really makes sense. It's the choir is behind you from the back and these things. So the moment the musicians really use the tools creatively and aesthetically, and just because they make sense from the perception and the emotions that wants to be transferred with the music, that's a pretty positive development I see. But of course, there are still a lot of productions that are just, they took the stereo mix, put it on L and R and used one object moving around, and that's it. Still happens, but I think that generally a lot of power and time and money is being put into the productions of new music, or even all the back catalogs that's being upmixed currently. Also super interesting.
I really love that you guys take such a positive perspective and spin on this, because it's apparent, all the right kind of tools that are coming out, to be able to create spatially, actually including Mantra back here on the right, this other company, Mantra, friends of mine, they're creating new spatialized tools, even where you're using your hands and reaching out and manipulating a 3D object, and that's creating the sound. It's creating the sound design and manipulating space. So it's like the tools are coming, and there's this great positive approach to things becoming unified in a way that still retains people's individuality and unique value propositions, value chains that you guys as companies and developers offer to the community. So maybe my devil's advocate, living on my left shoulder, that sort of air of skepticism that I expressed earlier is more about the idea that maybe it's the starting place where these came from, right? Because music industry didn't start out with spatial. You guys were developing tech, you're working in VR, right? You're solving unique problems for specific mediums, and now we're facing this sort of worlds collide moment, right? Of wanting to bring that technology mainstream and see how it can impact other mediums such as the music industry. So I guess my next question for you guys would be, outside of music itself, like we're all talking about music and spatial, right? And wanting to mix it spatial, but what are the other ways that people can experience and use the tools that either you're developing or the tool sets that exist out in the world, or will, even using immersive audio speakers and stuff? Maybe it's not in a recording studio, maybe it's in a space like this. What are some of the unique and other ways that you guys see right now and in the near future that you think people can be using spatial audio? Because what I'm thinking is a lot of the creators that are here, they're looking for ways to monetize their spatial creations, and maybe music won't be it. Maybe it'll be something else. I'm really interested to see how you think this is going to start to spread and branch out, even though arguably we're in the beginning stages of even just touching the music industry.
I can start a track.
Please do.
Which is, if you're a music composer today, you might think that you're composing for a sweet spot, and maybe multiple people are going to be able to enjoy it if they're sitting close together. But if you think of it as, if you're a game developer and you want to make it your game a musical experience, you would probably not think of it producing it the same way as a person surrounded by a bubble of sound that walks around with you. I think you would think of something where you can walk to some of the performers. You can remix in real time. The game could involve changing the balance between multiple instruments, etc. Things you could do in a game, but the way we approach music today, once it's delivered, it's baked. The balance and the spatial relative space position of the instruments is baked. And I think there's a future that I long for, where we merge game and VR and augmented reality technology with the tools that we're using today to create music. And I think it'll require cloud-based processing, and the GPU audio has a future there.
Thank you, Jean-Marc.
That's exactly what you're mentioning. I mean, it's this shift from 3 degrees of freedom that we currently have in Atmos setups or multi-channel or NV-Sonics to 6 degrees of freedom, where you're not able just to rotate your head, but also walk around. And I think this is super interesting, especially also for music creation. So we have a workflow where you can mix your production in the DAW and then transfer that mix with all the positioning and whatever and movement into the Unity game engine. And then you can walk through it, might it be in VR or WASD with a keyboard or whatever, you can walk through it. And I mean, that's just, I mean, as I just mentioned, we're just talking about aesthetics for 3 degrees of freedom, but this is even a new aesthetic, because then you really have to talk about distance attenuation. What happens if you're closer to that instrument? You hear the other a little lower level, and these things. It's super complex, like a mix you do for a game, which is something they do already for 20, 30 years. But merging this part, like music experience and then walking around that, is super interesting.
So you're talking about being able to use a traditional music production workflow, mix it in an immersive format, and just send that straight to a game engine.
Yeah, it's
so that people can transverse the piece of music in real time.
It's not an immersive format, it's really object-based. So you take like a spatializer and then you transfer just the metadata into a Unity, open it up, and then you have all the positioning, walking, moving around you, and then you can walk through it and experience that. And that's like quite nice to walk through that. But it's a new aesthetic again.
Quite nice is such an understatement. Yeah.
I was going to second that motion, because we work a lot with Hollywood and they spend so much money on creating amazing soundtracks, and they want to have the same quality in engine. And early on, we realized that that wasn't possible. And we also have with Mach 1 Spatial, we have APIs that drop into Unreal Engine or Unity that allow you to drop in that sort of, volumetrically baked mix with 6 DOF head tracking and everything. I was going to add that I feel like as sort of reality and digital start blending, I feel like there's also the rise of the audio UX, and it's sort of the end of the visual industrial complex and the beginning of the audio UX, because you can walk around the real world and have spatial information with a hands-down, heads-up experience, whereas if it's visual, you have to stop. You have to, stop doing whatever you're doing in reality. But with spatial audio, it can give this amazing layer of information around you. So we've integrated into, HERE Technologies is one of the biggest mapping companies in the world for cars, where they're using safety guidance data with spatial audio, but then also you could take that same car and you're driving through, and we've seen artists put forward apps, there's this one that I thought was really cool. As you're driving along and you're listening to songs, they can tell you the context of those songs. So maybe you're listening to Tom York's Harrow Hill Road song, and you're driving in that area, and they're like, okay, this is the area where David Kelly committed suicide, or that's what the song's about. So the sort of layer of context, the sort of geolocated context with spatial audio and content is kind of interesting, and definitely a different way of making money other than spatial music.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
No.
There are, of course, the usual suspects. Okay, cinema, TV, video games, and music. But then there is a lot of life out of it and out of the traditional things, like Jean-Marc was saying, okay, why, yes, we are used to have musical as a linear mode, why not make it interactive? And could be fully interactive, could be partially interactive, and being only the point of view that is changing. There is many other areas. For instance, we have some of our users are using this to create things for yoga, people using spatial audio for health. For instance, an hour ago, I was talking to people that are using spatial audio for health and helping people with spatial audio in hospitals and other places. If you think, why not use spatial audio, for instance, in retail? You have these stores, why not use spatial audio and sense like people being in the middle of the woods, or the middle of the, and giving experience to the users where they are shopping. And so there is a lot of things, if you think outside the box, where spatial audio could be a perfect fit. Pretty much every time that you want people to feel immersed, okay, spatial audio is there as a right tool to help with that illusion.
I would have to agree. I think that there's a good percentage of our business which is not the traditional sort of stuff. So we've seen our products go into like yoga type of places, and then when you actually go and visit, because you're just selling a box, right? Well, at least we are, but we want to get close to the customer and understand what it is they're doing. And then when you actually go visit and see and hear and feel the whole perception of what it is that they're attempting to do with their clients. And we've seen this even, one particular customer, he called and wanted to know about GLM and what we could do with this, blah, blah, blah. And then at some point he sent me some pictures of a container, like a shipping container that he had modified, and he had turned it into an art exhibit of some sort. He had software move his hands and it would send light pulses out. All these sounds would appear, and he had like 20 loudspeakers inside of a 40-foot shipping container. And you're kind of scratching your head and you're thinking, where did these guys come up with these things? How does this happen? It's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and we have theater, you have parks, you have even 2 days ago I was talking to someone that was saying that a restaurant use spatial audio because they want to get a different experience to their audience. So
I remember during the pandemic, we actually did this one experience. It's by a British directing company called Darkfields. They have an app. And it was this app where, they had a countdown to the clock where like get your drink and sit down. And then they sort of said, sit at a kitchen table with your partner opposite you, blindfold yourself, but put a glass of water here. They had all these props that you had to put around you. And then as the theater show started, the first thing they said is like, your partner sitting opposite you has been replaced. It's not him anymore. And you're like, oh shit. And then the sort of spatial audio experience unfolds where they actually use the props of water. So you hear the glass breaking and water splashing. And so they've really been really smart about sort of putting all the objects and then moving them just for sound. But, you blindfolded during the whole experience, and it was riveting. It was like during the pandemic, and it felt like I literally went to the theater show for the evening. And I was like, holy shit, like directors only using audio.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I have this, I'm not going to tell you my ideas, but I have an idea for an audio game. Yeah. One of the things nobody mentioned, or unless it slipped by me just because I'm paying attention to the subs coming from the hall too. Audiobooks, right? Oh. Spatial podcasts, narrative art, right? Yeah. Music is narrative. Sorry, guys, it's narrative. It tells a story. Even if that story is like a moment in time that doesn't travel forward and you're just stuck in one place, there's some sort of a story, some sort of a human experience attached to that, right? It's trying to pull your emotions. Anything that pulls an emotion, I think, in my opinion, has some sort of narrative quality. So I think that spatial audiobooks are probably going to explode. I predicted, maybe 3 years ago, I was looking at the compound annual growth rate of audiobooks during the pandemic. It was almost 25%, year over year, right? It's pretty high. I think it was 24.7. And now it's exploded. Now we have mandates from other companies to start carrying these things. And if you guys get out there and you start producing, why can't a book be a medium or a vessel for your music, right? It's like a film, everyone's trying to get their music licensed into films. Why not start a side industry licensing things into other mediums, right? Narrative forms. So,
I think I mentioned it, but through another name, like radio plays. I mean, in Germany, it's like Hörspiel, which is pretty famous there, like a movie without the image. And this is something we started with like in 2014, where we like produced it, and we didn't have the tool for that, but it was exactly this cynical approach. Someone's coming by, holds a weapon here, you could hear it and shoot someone running. So the cynical approach really through the audio world is super, super exciting. And I'm really happy that people are taking it off under another name of podcast, however, or cynical podcast. And it's pretty cool. And we got pretty much feedback, especially from blind people, because for them this medium is super interesting, and especially if it's binaural, it has even more spatial, or not more, it has finally spatial information for them. And yeah, I'm very excited on this medium and what's happening there.
Yeah, the thing that gets me thinking a lot is, this idea is if all music is just spatial by default, no one's going to notice anymore at some point, right? Like what makes it special, and that's the thing I love about narrative projects, is that people enter into them with the intention of, experiencing something, right? So, any tools, in my opinion, or, verticals that we can explore that, increase intentionality on the creative side, because we know that the user is anticipating something. If we know that the end listener is going to anticipate an experience, it's going to change the way that we produce things, right? And that's what I love about every one of your companies up here, is that you create the tools, that people can use to do that. Nuno's new spatial synthesizer sounds very cool. I haven't heard it yet, but the idea sounds amazing. I can't wait to hear it. Hopefully we can demo it in this space. So since this is a kind of a short chat today, we do have to kind of move on to a final question. This is a bit more of a promotional question, but I want you to approach it from the creative standpoint. How many people in this audience are creating audio in some way? Obviously. Okay, so. Okay. How many of you have already created spatial audio? Okay. How many of you want to create spatial audio, but you haven't? Okay, great. So, perfect question then. What are you guys doing individually with the projects you're working on, with the tools that you're experiencing? What recommendations can you make to people for your tools or other things that you like, that are democratizing, make it easy to step in and start creating, where your creative ideas hit the page and they can get out to the listener as fast as possible? So what are you guys doing for that? Whoever wants to, let's let Nuno start, since, I mentioned him.
For me, all the tools that we do must have a certain component of fun. Okay.
Fun,
And that's even on the beginning of sound particles. I started spending 2 years of my life creating sound particles, even before having a company, even before knowing if someone. I was a guy in Hollywood, in Portugal, doing something that could eventually be used in Hollywood. But the chances of that happening was, let's face it, very low. But I was doing things for the fun of it. And for instance, something like you were mentioning the 3D synth. Okay, it was okay. I want to do this because it's fun. Okay, probably there is other areas of audio where I can get more money out of it. Okay, but this is fun. So that's, for us, it's important to have this component of fun and doing things for fun, because especially when you are doing something like in this area of spatial audio, you are pretty much a pioneer. You are creating tools for a market that doesn't exist. Eventually, if you are lucky enough, in the future may be an interesting market, and you can do some money and to grow your team and do more things. But I think that if you don't do it for the fun, at least you are not on the right thing. And for us, it's also allow then our users to have that fun of using sound particles, or using the synth, or using other things.
And I can confirm that sound particles is a lot of fun. So please, try them out.
From our position, a lot of people say, well, what do you do? And say, well, you guys sell speakers. Like, no, we kind of got beyond that. From our perspective, we want to help people buy the right speaker, buy speakers. Because without that connection, if you're just trying to make a sale, you're not doing the customer the right job. You're not doing the right justice for the customer. And you need to be able to interact with these people. And one of the things I would say is, the shutdown really did force us to do business in a much different way than we had been doing in the past. And, that whole digital aspect of getting closer to the customer really does enhance the ability to make the right sale, because we have so many different products that can be used in so many different ways. And if you're just trying to sell a system, you're not doing it. You're not covering the customer's needs, because everybody in here, just as much as everybody has a unique way of doing things, but how you do it really does become part of the whole, what do you say, makes you happy. What's it going to take to make you happy? And, so being able to be closer to the customer is really, really important. That's been a big part of our growth over the last
Absolutely.
couple of years.
I've experienced that with Paul. I think Genelec does a great job of that. And what I like about the Genelecs is you have those small ones. You can build a little spatial cube for yourself at your house for way less than I did. 7 years ago, I was getting massive speakers. I didn't know what I was doing, and now you guys have helped to make it so easy for people.
Well,
so
and
thank you for that.
the other part of that is when you're selling loudspeakers or when you're helping people buy loudspeakers, there's so much of an education that comes back to us.
Definitely.
And that finds its way back to engineering eventually. And that's really, really important. I'll go back and say again, there's so many different ways to play this game. And it doesn't have to be like this. It can be, it could be much smaller. The key piece of the puzzle is trying to understand exactly what that customer is doing and how they're doing it, what they're doing. What's their future? What's their vision? What are they, what can you teach us about, what you're doing? That's really
Awesome. Thanks. Christian.
Yeah, so our approach, I would say, is to offer high quality spatialization, also on the spatializer side, but also on the virtualization side. Also on a price point that is affordable, but also scalable. So to offer tools that have a lot of feature sets, smaller feature sets, these things, so that users can try out a trial or free version. So I think it's important for every level you start in, if you're a veteran producer, professional, semi-professional, that you can try out the tools and have the option to use high quality.
Awesome. Jackie.
As a company, we really behind the idea that spatial audio is a medium, not a features or room modeling effect. So we focused a lot on building a SDK that's a framework, because that framework allows best practices and standards and interoperability to exist. And that's what we're building with GPU audio, trying to sort of democratize access to that, because we do have products out in the marketplace that cost money, although we do offer a really good free trial if anybody wants to try out our products. We do also have a workflow called Mach on Spatial System, and then we also have APIs for Unity and Unreal. And then our SDK sort of has an open transcoder. So until we sort of have those standards and best practices, I don't think it's realistic that spatial audio will grow to the extent that it could as a medium. So what we're trying to do is offer the stereo of spatial audio so that everybody knows what they're mixing to, and everything can sound the same on every playback, and every developer building an app or building it into a platform knows what it should sound like. And as we move around the world, interoperability is becoming so important. And we actually started building the transcoder when we had to ship Alien for 20th Century Fox, and they asked us to distribute it to 38 different platforms. And we didn't have that line item on our budget. And I went back to them and I said, we got to remix this 38 times. That's you owe me 3 times the money. And they were like, well, you already signed the contract. We don't care, deliver it. And I remember my team wanting to kill me. We stayed up for 5 nights, 24 hours, just remixing things for these different apps. And we're like, there's no way the industry can move forward like this. It's absolutely insane. But at the same time, we've sort of watched an industry sort of realize this. And before we used to complain about it to people on the phone, and now they complain to me about it. So you can see the problem. People are hitting those same roadblocks that we hit early on. So I hope that our framework can offer the creative choice of which format you want to mix in. You shouldn't be on Rails to use a format.
Yeah.
It should be whatever the artist wants to do, whatever sounds the best should be that. And so we're trying to be the stereo of spatial and unify a very broken pipeline so that everybody can mix to and understand what it is, and really build this new medium, something new.
That's very cool. Yeah. So everybody, check out Dear Reality, Sound Particles, and Mach1.tech. They've all got various approaches, as you're mentioning. It's all great. I use all of it, to be honest, and I've really enjoyed my time with it. I have one last question for Jean-Marc, and then do we have a Q&A? Does anybody have questions? Just let me know in advance. Otherwise, we'll play a track for you guys. Any questions? So, okay. So Jean-Marc, what would you recommend for people? Open source, free. Yeah, something that
Reaper.
people can use for free, just in case. If they're dabbling in spatial audio, they're not ready to kind of dive in and make that commitment. I know that you guys offer free stuff too, but Jean-Marc, outside of the products here, like what other stuff do you like? Is there any research projects or things people can try out?
Okay, so one thing that I think is going to help us overall is if we democratize the tools to create spatial audio.
Right.
So I think we should get to a point where it's as easy to create immersive audio as it is to create stereo. There's a very established practice of creating stereo music, and I think the tools are not yet where they need to be to make it as easy to apprehend creating immersive audio. So that's one of the things that interests me, but I don't believe that there's an open source solution for that yet. It's more the kind of thing when I work on my own time that I think is one of the gaps that we can help fill.
Absolutely. Yeah.
One of the issues that is also not open source is that today binaural rendering on headphones does not sound as natural as listening on speakers. So I think that's another area that is worth investing research in. So that I spend some of my time on that, but it's not a product yet. If you talk about open source, I would say there's an equivalent of OpenGL that's called OpenAL that is no longer used very broadly, but it is open source and it is a way to create immersive 6DoF content.
Yeah.
Using a free tool that is OpenAL Soft, which is totally open source. And if somebody is interested in creating a 6DoF music and what that would be like, this would be something that can be used.
That sounds awesome.
For free.
That's very cool. Yeah, just asking for the more techie, tinkerers in the audience, where they can get their hands dirty with some of that stuff. Well, look, everybody, thank you so much for coming today to experience this talk. I'd like to give a hand to our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much. So, as we wrap things up, I would say feel free to talk to everybody. We're going to end things by playing a piece of music that Jacqueline's studio produced. That's going to be a lot of fun. We'll play it on this immersive system. And as we do that, just feel free to hang out, talk, have a conversation, and we're going to get set up for the next event. So thank you so much.
The piece is the one that I spoke about earlier, the Eli Kesler from Lucky Me Warp Records.
This is on Warped Records, right? Yeah, this piece
He's
is
an
sick,
amazing
so stick around,
percussionist.
please. Yeah, it's very cool. So we're going to play that right now. Thanks, guys.